Ethical considerations. You may wish to skip this chapter. A joke, of course. This book has already established a broad definition of manipulation, for practical reasons, which allows for a range of manipulative behaviors and does not include immoral behavior as a prerequisite. This chapter is a necessary exploration of ethics within the broad definition of manipulation provided. There is a lot of gray area here. Ultimately, deciding what is right and wrong is up to each individual. This may vary depending on cultural values, laws, religious beliefs, and a learned moral compass. What this chapter establishes is an understanding of the impact of manipulative behavior, in an effort to allow any readers to make informed judgments about their actions. Deception. Reading this book, so far, you may already have run into examples of manipulation that you believe to be morally wrong. Congratulations on having a moral compass. One example of a difficult area, ethically, is deception. For some, all forms of lying are wrong. This includes white lies and partial truths. If you are one of those people, you can still use the advice in this book, but it's going to change the way you approach manipulation. Specifically, your approach will avoid the use of deception and focus, instead, on power and persuasion. For everyone else, you might need to decide how much and with what forms of deception you feel comfortable. First, consider the issues with deception. Deceiving others can lead others into actions which act either against or without advancing their own interests. A side effect of manipulating them into acting in your own. Deceiving others could also be of benefit to them, tricking them into actions that will improve their health or career in the long term, but which they were not capable of doing themselves. Telling a child that their favorite superhero enjoys vegetables is an example of this. The deceit is intended to improve the child's diet, which could benefit their long-term health. Deception can also have unintended consequences. In most cases, telling such a lie to a child is unlikely to end in disaster, but isn't it feasible that a child could discover the ruse and develop distrust towards the deceiver? This could harm them by hardening their susceptibility to future manipulation in their interests, or it could encourage lying tendencies in the child. There is no knowing, for certain, the ultimate impact of a given action. Consider, also, the situation where deception takes place. It's perhaps expected behavior to try and completely deceive your counterpart regarding your intentions in a game of chess or checkers, a war, or even in contract negotiation. However, many people would consider it immoral to hold even the smallest untruth from a future spouse. You might even take the stance that deception, and any other behavior, is only a crime if you get caught. It's a potentially cynical worldview, but there's an argument to say that it's a dog-eat-dog world, and if you're not willing to be ruthless, someone else is going to do the same to you. It's not the place of this book to decide where you draw your lines in the sand. However, some advice would be to establish some ethical boundaries, such as, no lies that I have reason to believe will cause harm to another. You might find this too stringent or too lenient, so define your own boundaries, and if the moment arises where you recognize a chance to break that boundary, for your own potential gain, at least you will have the opportunity to confront your own morality, whether you decide to go ahead or not. Abuse. With the reminder that this book is not telling you how to align your moral compass, it is necessary, still, to mention that most people consider abuse to be a bad thing. The issue is how to define abuse. You have almost certainly heard the phrase, abuse of power. Consider something that most people would place at the worst end of the spectrum, such as the sexual abuse of mentally handicapped minors. It is abuse on multiple levels, because the minor has a number of vulnerabilities. Significantly, parents and guardians of these individuals are in a position of trust to protect these individuals. They have little defense against, and lack the judgment to understand the ways in which sexual abuse can impact their psychology. It's an awful, sobering thought to establish the extreme end of the abuse spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, there may be more nuanced or controversial examples of what some people call abuse, such as ordering an extra portion of fries when charging a meal to the company account. It's an unnecessary indulgence which allows the abuser to benefit excessively from the trust they have been given. Taking this even further, it's possible to draw into question the nature of business relationships. You might consider the idea of someone sleeping their way to the top to be dismissive. However, how is it possible to reconcile personal relationships where one person clearly has power over the other, for example a boss and an employee, with ideas of the abuse of power? Are these relationships possible without elements of abuse? A person may naturally be drawn to their boss due to the power they hold, as has been established. At the same time, it may be impossible for a boss to enter into a non-abusive relationship, given the inherent vulnerability of their employee. Perhaps it is completely possible to separate work and pleasure, but these situations are sticky, to say the least. More pertinent to the times, it is possible to draw comparisons to the role of a casting director for Hollywood movies. Many people have said that it is inherently wrong for someone who has power over another, i.e., they can help their progress towards achieving their goals, to enter into a romantic relationship. Isn't it the case that, in some of these instances, aspiring actors are throwing themselves at people in positions of power? The implication, then, is that power brings responsibility. Certainly, that carries an element of truth in the eyes of many people and much of the media. Once again, you will need to decide what constitutes abuse in your eyes. This may be defined by the potential victims of your actions, in which case you might not view a large corporation as a particularly tragic casualty, and order that extra basket of fries. Additional food for thought would be to consider what makes a person vulnerable and whether or not it is truly possible to decide that a person is not vulnerable. If you successfully manipulate another person, then, surely, to some degree, they are vulnerable, if only to your cunning. Honor. Navigating all of these ethical issues may, to some degree, force you to rely on a code of honor. This might be dictated by a culture or a creed. It may be created by yourself or your peers. It may even be part of a commitment made to uphold a certain level of integrity, as is common among reputable media outlets. This can help you to make ethical decisions by placing boundaries for you. However, it's rare that, when push comes to shove, a code of honor will actually stop you from taking an action outside of its bounds. That is up you alone. The ends versus the means. One alternative to establishing clear ethical boundaries is to judge each case completely on its merits. In this instance, there is more flexibility. In particular, you may decide that any action can be justified if the result is positive enough to outweigh the means of achieving it. There is a further issue, which even the most flexible moral gymnasts ought to consider. Even if the ends justify the means, could those ends be achieved with less wrongdoing? Once again, it is not the place of the book to enforce a specific moral code. However, even if your approach to ethics, in manipulation, is flexible, would you lose anything by defining boundaries anyway? At least in that case, you can recognize when you cross those boundaries, and it gives you a prompt to address and justify your reasons for doing so. Intent and unscrupulousness. This book has already partly addressed the issue of intent in manipulation. Consider the child who screams. Young children make a lot of decisions based on emotion and instinct. The intent may not be to manipulate, but the manipulation is still present. If you have spent time around children, you may know that, when a child hurts themselves, there is a pause before their reaction. In many cases, they will look to their parent. If the parent's reaction is shock, they may become unsettled and start to cry. If the parent's reaction is to remain calm, often the child will remain calm themselves. They are learning to navigate the world and their influence within it. It is difficult to assign blame to the child for manipulative behavior, even when you would find such behavior to be unimpressive or undesirable in an adult. On the subject of adults, you may also differentiate between unscrupulousness, willful disregard for morals or laws that stand in the way of one's goals, and a complete lack of knowledge of those boundaries. Although both are potentially ethical breaches, the latter indicates a lack of responsibility, while the former is an extreme form of egoism, total self-interest. In practice, this shouldn't be a choice you're able to make. Effective manipulation should involve an analysis of your actions and, at the very least, a reasonable estimate of their results. That means you'll already have the inform. Additionally, making moral decisions, based on information and consideration, will allow you to rest in the knowledge that you took responsibility for your decision and actively understood the consequences. It could prevent you from making a decision you live to regret. The law. Despite the non-committal nature of this chapter, there is one aspect against which this book advises you completely. That is breaking the law. Under no circumstances is it recommended that you break the law, and, if you suspect that you are engaging in criminal activity, including fraud or another form of illegal deception-based manipulation, you are advised to investigate the law thoroughly and avoid any wrongdoing. Ending up in jail is almost certainly not a way to achieve your goals, and the best way to avoid jail is to not break the law. Methodology. This chapter is where things get really practical. In this chapter, you will learn to apply the ideas established in previous chapters and create an effective strategy for manipulation. The core of developing an effective manipulation strategy revolves around influencing others to perform actions which further your goals. Step 1. Define your goals. This is the focus of your manipulation strategy. Without this, you run the risk of manipulating people aimlessly. While diversion can be part of an effective manipulation strategy, it should be done deliberately, rather than at random. One important consideration regarding your goals is to determine if they are something you really want to achieve. It's no good saying that your goal is to rule the world if you aren't willing to put in the effort. Who needs that kind of pressure, anyway? It's also better to define goals to which there is already a clear path. You may have larger goals, such as becoming the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. However, unless you already have a clear idea of your path to that goal, it's probably better to start smaller. Take that goal and break it down. The first thing you might need is managerial experience. Give yourself a goal of reaching a managerial position in your company, and have at least 50 people to you, either directly or via the chain of command. Break that down even further, if you need to, and set your first goal as becoming the leader of your team. Career success isn't the only type of goal this methodology works for. You might set a goal to carve a niche at work which gives you more free time and allows you to work with less stress. You might set a goal to find a loving spouse. The goal itself doesn't matter, as long as you really want it. Don't forget to set a date on your goal as well. It doesn't matter how you arrive at your estimate, even if you make simple guess, you can always revise it later based on improved information. What a date gives you is a restraint, encouraging you to think creatively in order to accelerate your plans. Now take a note of all your goals, long-term and short-term, big and small, and order them in terms of immediacy. Remind yourself of your goals every single day. In doing so, you are focusing your brain on a task. Think of a time when achieved highly at work, school, or college. Think about what it took to achieve something that made you proud. Was it working a moderate amount of hours, or did it involve going the extra mile? Were you thinking about the project night and day, running it through in your head before you went to sleep and structuring it in your mind? Of course you were. That's what made the difference. By focusing your brain on a task, you dedicated all your resources to achieving highly. The more attention you dedicated to manipulation, the more you'll be able to accomplish and the better you'll succeed at it. Oh, and keep your goals a secret from everyone for now, naturally. Step 2. Map out your paths to success. Now that you have your goals, and you've broken them down sufficiently, it should be fairly easy to find a path to success. If your goal is a promotion, you'll need a boss to promote you. If your goal is finding a loving spouse, you'll need to find someone who's going to provide that and for them to agree to marriage. Consider alternate paths to success as well. For instance, if you want to take your boss position, one path might be for them to get fired, leaving a vacancy for you. In another situation, they could be promoted, leaving a spot open. Map out as many paths as you can and consider them all possibilities for now. Once you've done that, it's time to establish the parties involved. Who would be in charge of the decision-making process for your promotion? Who are your potential rivals? How does information flow between these people? In the case of achieving a promotion, your manipulation strategy should be to make the people who have the power to promote you want to do so. You've seen the movie Inception, right? Unfortunately, hacking into someone's dreams isn't an option. In order to manipulate your target, you need to start understanding their goals and behavior. Step 3. Gather information. This book's final chapters will directly address analyzing people, including yourself. For now, it is enough to include it as part of your manipulation strategy. Consider the goals of the people whom you need to influence, those who will decide whether or not you are promoted. Map out all of their actions, starting from now and as much of their previous behavior as possible. Look for patterns and attempt to relate each of their actions to what you perceive as their goals. Then look for ways in which they don't align and reassess their goals to pinpoint what matches. Make an assessment of your own assets. Include hard facts, such as your time at a company, your currently salary and your qualifications, as well as soft skills, such as charisma and persuasion. Profile all the parties involved, including those who have the power to promote you, your rivals and anyone in orbit of your path to success. Include their goals and try to record their actions, spotting patterns and connecting them to their goals. Keep organized notes of all of this information and conceal it from everyone. The aim here is to give your brain as much information as possible. Once again, imagine your brain as a machine. It has the best chance of producing the correct outputs, actions, if it has access to the best inputs, information, and the better you can objectively organize this information, the easier it will be to make smart decisions, rather than subjective decisions based on instinct. After a while, say a few days, you should start to build a picture. Take more time if you feel like you need it. However, you don't need to have a perfect understanding of the situation to begin the next stage of information gathering, which is to identify key figures among those who you are profiling and start doing the same thing for people related to their goals. In the case of those who have the power to promote you, this may very well be the people who have the power to promote them. Going a step further is going to give you an even deeper understanding of the way that these people operate, what drives them and what is likely to impact their decisions. You will continue gathering information indefinitely, even as you begin manipulating others. Make it a habit and you will get better at identifying the goals and behavioral patterns of others faster and more accurately. Focus on understanding where power lies and how the parties involved reach their decisions. Try to identify what provokes them to take certain actions. Relate this back to their own goals. Step 4. Identify opportunities and threats. This is where it's time to use your brain. You should be thinking about your goals every day by now and developing a deeper understanding of the mechanics of your situation. Opportunities. Remember the goal you have set for yourself. And remember your essential aim is to want the parties in charge of your promotion to want to promote you. What have you learned about their goals? Take a typical scenario and say that they want to achieve good figures, they want to improve the efficiency of your team by increasing its profits. Relate what you have learned about the parties in orbit of your goals back to the paths you mapped out. Start using that knowledge to assess the likelihood success in each case. Is it more likely that your current team leader will be fired or promoted? Is there another opportunity for you to reach the same tier of management elsewhere, within or even outside the company? Weigh the options against one another. Say you have reason to believe that your current team leader is underperforming, and you expect them to be fired rather than promoted. In this instance, you need to be careful of the timing. The opportunity is presenting itself and when it arises, you need to be in pole position. What if you're in pole position right now? Then it's time to get your team leader fired as soon as possible. Relate this to the 3 main tools of manipulation identified in earlier chapters. Power. As the candidate in pole position, you are perceived to have the most power to help your potential new bosses, those who would promote you, to achieve their goals. Likewise, you have also identified that your current boss, your team leader, is facing the chop. This is, almost certainly, because they are perceived to lack the power to help their immediate superiors achieve their goals. However, they haven't been fired yet. This might be for a number of reasons. Perhaps they haven't had enough opportunity to prove themselves. Perhaps their superiors aren't certain about you as a replacement. Persuasion. Forget marching up to those with the power to promote you and giving an epic speech about why you're the perfect candidate to be the next team leader. This isn't a Hollywood movie. More to the point, the world won't simply bend to your knees because you ask it to. Deception. What you can do is act to control the flow of information that reaches your boss superiors. The aim, in this instance, is to decrease their perception of your boss power and get your boss fired more quickly. The ways in which you could achieve this are too many to list. How close are you to these people, whom you need to influence? Who has their ear and what makes them tick? Perhaps another team leader, reliant on the actions of your team, is likely to complain about your boss if your team fails to deliver. Now think, who has their ear? Possibly someone on their team. Possibly someone with whom you're on talking terms. Now you have an opportunity, sufficiently distanced from yourself, to indirectly influence the people directly above your boss. Recapping, this refers to someone, of roughly your level, working for a team, roughly the same level as your own, which is dependent on the actions of your team. Immediately begin profiling this person, their goals, and their actions. Bear in mind, this is a hypothetical example, but it gives you the idea of the kind of person you might stand to gain by influencing. You will have to analyze your own situation and form a strategy based on these ideas. Note that so much of what goes into effective manipulation is deciding who to manipulate. You are likely to be manipulating everyone at once, to some degree. Later chapters will give you advice on how to project power using body language and speech, giving you increased opportunities for manipulation in general. Right now, you are forming a strategy for manipulating a specific situation through extraordinary means.